There's never been really an easy time to be the church. Sometimes we like to imagine that back in the earliest days, maybe of the first century, the followers of Jesus who knew him, that it was easiest to be the followers of Jesus, to be the church then, because things must have been clear and they must have had clear vision and known what to do. But when you actually read the stories in the book of Acts, you find maybe from the beginning, we've always been in a position of struggle and of challenge, both internally, trying to figure out for ourselves within the community of Jesus how we live, how we act, how we operate, and then certainly with tensions in the outside world. I know sometimes it is really easy for us to live in the 21st century and tell ourselves, man, it's so hard to be Christian. It feels like the world is so hostile and Christians are never on the same page with one another. We disagree about each other, with each other, and we have tensions with each other. This must be a new thing. A long time ago, they were all clearly all on the same page and everybody supported the Christians. Well, not really. We saw that in our most recent Bible studies. We've been working our way through the book of Acts. We had the chance to look at both Acts chapter 11 and 12, and we sort of saw this twofold tension of inside the community disagreements or challenges, and then pressures from the outside world as well. In chapter 11, we have Peter, who had just had this amazing experience of being led by the Holy Spirit to meet this Gentile Roman centurion named Cornelius. And even though he is an outsider, foreigner, stranger, an army officer in the enemy of occupying army, God's Spirit welcomes him and his whole family. They come to faith in Jesus and are baptized. And Peter has this sort of moment of revelation of, oh, God's doing a new thing, and God's welcoming people from whatever background they come from, Jewish, Gentile, wherever, even if you were the most outsider of outsiders, the most Gentile of Gentiles, you're welcome in the community of Jesus. That takes some time for Peter to think through. Well, as he sort of is processing it, he comes back to the Christian leaders in Jerusalem, and they're all upset. Like, whoa, what are you doing there, Peter? Just deciding for yourself that you're going to let in those Gentiles? And so Peter has to tell them the story and basically says, the reason I was eating with uncircumcised people and welcoming those Gentile people was the Holy Spirit told me I don't get to call unclean what God has called clean. I don't get to keep out the people that God has said are now welcome. And yes, I know we all grew up with the rules. We all grew up with the practices that you were supposed to keep kosher. You were supposed to practice the rules and commandments of the Torah. And now God is saying that anybody and everybody from whatever background can belong to this community of Jesus followers. The whole rest of the Christian community had to simmer and sit with that and think about it and percolate. They didn't all instantly go, oh, well, if Peter said it, then I guess we're all on the same page. It took them some time to think this out. Meanwhile, other Christian groups are still sort of wrestling with it because news travels slow in the first century. They're not all getting instant social media updates on their smartphones about what Peter has decided or what they've decided as the church to do. So there's tensions in the rest of chapter 11 between Peter and other leaders in the wider church in Antioch who are not sure about why are we letting in these outsiders. It takes a while, in other words, for the early church to sort of think through, well, if God's Spirit says someone is welcome, they really are welcome. That's going to continue to be a challenge through several chapters in the book of Acts and through a lot of the New Testament. You can tell the early church really wrestled with that question. If we thought this is how the rules worked and God was in this box, was God allowed to widen the box? Is God allowed to break things open and welcome people further out that we thought were excluded before? The early church started with those kinds of questions. And the only reason we got to the place of including Gentiles like me, and quite possibly Gentiles like you, is that people were willing to follow where the Spirit was leading. So those tensions on the inside, as the Christian community figures out, are we welcoming in all kinds of people? And how do we make those decisions? That was a challenge. Secondarily, in chapter 12, we get a crackdown from the forces on the outside. King Herod, the next in the line of the family dynasty of the Herod family, cracks down on the church, puts James, who's the brother of John, in jail, and then executes him, and then finds Peter and arrests him. There's this moment in chapter 12 where it's sort of the stark reminder that the early church knew they might well lose their lives for following Jesus. Jesus had been warning them, and there's this sort of twofold reminder. James is put to death, and there's no miraculous saving of him. On the other hand, Peter's sitting in jail waiting that the next day the executioner's axe is going to fall on him, and an angel busts him out of jail. It's this important reminder that we can't ever quite pin down the Holy Spirit to say, oh, if you're faithful, the bad thing won't happen to you. Sometimes it does. And on the other hand, if you're faithful, sometimes God does bring a way to bring you through. And Peter continues. After this amazing jailbreak, he lets the rest of the disciples know he's safe and then goes and hides out somewhere where he can be safe for a while until the heat is off. And despite all the cruelty of Herod and the ways that he, like his father Herod the Great before him, were ruthless and fearful and paranoid and violent and egocentric, there's finally some comeuppance, you might say, for Herod. We get this final scene in chapter 12 where Herod is meeting with a group of his subjects who he thinks have been disloyal, and they're putting on this big show of trying to fawn over him because they would like him to show favor to them. And they all cry out, "Oh, Herod, you're not just like a mortal, you're like a god." And because Herod doesn't put a stop to that, he accepts their worship, sort of the culminating act of idolatry and of crookedness on Herod's part. The text says that an angel strikes him down, he's eaten by worms and dies. It is interesting, a little bit gross, but interesting that the text says he's eaten by worms and then dies. I'm not quite sure how that works. But there is this sense that, like Luke has been saying from the very, very beginning of his gospel with Mary's song, the Magnificat, and ultimately, God is on the side of pulling down the powerful from their thrones and lifting up the lowly, of raising up those who've been stepped on and taking down the overinflated a few pegs down. It doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen in our timing, at least. It doesn't maybe always happen the way we want it to. And it's worth noting, at no point is the Christian community called in this text to take up weapons and you go kill Herod because he's so wicked and cruel. God will take care of that. The old line from the Hebrew scriptures is that vengeance is mine, I will repay. In other words, it's God's job, it's God's prerogative to decide how to pull down which tyrant from which throne at what time. The Christian community's calling, yours and mine as well, is simply to be witnesses wherever we find ourselves. And if we lay down our lives like James did and end up being martyrs by laying down our lives, that may happen. If our way of being a witness is the way we live and that we continue to live on so we can tell the story and act in love the next day, that may be our witness as well. It's interesting to me that no matter what the challenges were, the pressures inside to wrestle with whether we were welcoming Gentiles, the pressures from the outside cracking down on the Christian community, there's this sense of the Spirit will keep leading us. Sometimes the answers don't come right away. It took a while for the church to sort of come to a conclusion on, yes, God really is welcoming in outsider Gentiles. And there were times when it just wasn't clear, how are we going to face persecution? They trusted that God would lead them through, that the Spirit would be the one who would lead them through, even when they didn't have immediate answers in the present moment. We're going to keep walking through the book of Acts, so we invite you to join us around the table Thursdays at 1 o'clock here at Community of Christ. There's a place for you at the table as we keep studying the story of the Spirit working through God's people in the church. See you then.